Hello, everyone. So today's episode is for anyone who is doing their PhD or is in a career of science and is thinking about transitioning to industry or starting their own business. And we have a guest who is an expert. What a coincidence in exactly this. He has his own company dedicated to this. So his name is David Giltner. He's primarily a physicist. That was his training and PhD at Colorado State University in the United States. As I said, he started a company called Turning Science, where he's a CEO as well, teaching scientists about business and transitioning to industry. He's also an author. We just chatted a little bit about his books, including the most recent one, Shaping the World, if I'm correct.
Yes.
And he's going to tell us all about that. So I want you to tell me about these books. What is in these books, David?
Yeah. So there are really two that I focus on. There's one that I wrote years ago that is kind of, I feel obsolete now. So the one I published in 2021, this was a pandemic project. I travel and I do workshops, but when the pandemic hit, all of a sudden I'm sitting at home and I thought, now is the time to put all this stuff I teach in my workshops into a book. And so it's a game, not a formula. How to succeed as a scientist working in the private sector. These are all my own ideas about playing the game in industry. The most recent one I'm really excited about as well is called Shaping the World, the vital role of scientists in industry. So in doing my work, I've interviewed lots of scientists, some as far back as when I began doing this in 2010. But I've interviewed them all throughout for my second book, and I did several more in the last year or two. These full interviews are with all these scientists. 26 different scientists are in this book in three categories. As you mentioned, I teach scientists how business works, how to transition into industry. So there are three sections. Some are employees. They went out and got a job at a company. Some are entrepreneurs. They decided to start their own company. And some are academic researchers. They're professors, but they collaborate with industry as a way of bringing in more industry, more research funding, and teaching their own PhDs and postdocs about industry. So when they go off to start their careers, they will have a head start. So that's what's in here, these 26 scientists and their full stories, how they became scientists, what they enjoy about it, and their transition to work with industry in whatever capacity that is. So, yeah.
How much work is it to make an effort like that with a book of a lot of interviews with scientists and to edit and to go through the whole process?
It's a lot of work. I mean, these are two different ones. If we talk about the interview book, I mean, that is a lot of work. The difference there is I don't have to write the entire book. I have conversations with people, much like we're doing here, transcribe it, I edit it down. That's a fun learning process. I tell people I learned so much from the interviews. I learned as much myself as, I hope to teach others with it. So they were great stories. I met great people, friends now that I will be in touch with for a long time. But it is a lot of work. It was probably a 2-year effort to really get it into a book, even though they're full interviews. I have things around it. I wanted to organize it. Part of that story is, so I travel a fair amount and I spend a lot of time in Europe and Germany in particular. In February of last year, I just holed up in a castle, actually, an Airbnb in a castle along the Rhine. I had 10 days between two different workshop gigs. And I said, I'm just going to knock this out. I'm going to sit here and, really organize the book, write some of the sections that go between the interviews and make this happen. So that was kind of a key turning point in putting it all together. But there's just so much in terms of, editing it and reviewing the layout. And of course, I worked with a publisher that did all of that. But it's a long haul. You design the cover, so many different things. So it's great to finally get it out. And
Cool.
some of these stories I've been hanging on to for a few years. And I really wanted to get the stories of these scientists out where people could read them because they're such great inspirational stories, about people building careers and making a difference in the world. That's what we do. That's that vital role. The great thing about industry, that is where the wonderful knowledge that we come up with in academic research actually gets turned into things people need and making a difference.
Before we go on to talk about, I think what we're going to be talking about for the most of this conversation, which is transitioning to industry, And I guess the topic of your other book, it's a game. Um, Maybe I would love that you share one story of those scientists. Like, just want to keep a moment on the new book. Could you share some snippet that maybe stuck with you as inspirational, particularly, or memorable?
We'll be right back to the podcast, but first, I want to say thank you to our sponsor, Litmaps. If you are struggling with the academic literature and you are overwhelmed by the number of papers you are trying to read and make sense out of it, Litmaps is here to help. And visualize for literature, you can find research gaps, and you can create a beautiful map and keep yourself updated every time a new paper comes out that is connected to the map you've built. And if you're working on a review paper with other collaborators, this map that you build, you can also share with your collaborators and have them build it so that you can go back and forth in exploring the important papers of your field. Litmaps is a fantastic tool that I've been using for over 6 months now, and I've found it incredibly useful for many purposes, and it's completely free to use. If, however, you want to use the more powerful Pro version, you can use the code in the description, and you'll get 30% off on all of your first-time purchases with Litmaps. Thank you, and let's get back to the episode.
Sure. There are many I could think of. How about this? I'll tell you the one that is behind the title, because I think that's a good one. So the scientist that I interviewed, his name is Chris Myatt. He's a physicist like me. And he actually worked for a group during his PhD. His advisor got the Nobel Prize. And they got it for, I think it was 2001 was when it was awarded, for demonstrating Bose-Einstein condensation. So any physicist in the audience would recognize that. And so I asked Chris when I interviewed him. So he's a successful entrepreneur. He's founded 2 different companies that he has sold off. And so he's done very well at that. But I asked him, I said, well, Chris, you have the perfect pedigree for an academic career, right? If your advisor got the Nobel Prize, you should be able to secure a university job. And yet you went into industry and you've done very well at it. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts there? And he said, when we demonstrated Bose-Einstein condensation, it was great. It was very cool. And we got the Nobel Prize. Of course, that is exciting. But the world didn't change when we did that. This was a theory that had been predicted long before by Einstein, and somebody was going to demonstrate it. And it was great that we were the ones that did it. But the world didn't change. I'll be much more excited so at the time, he had not sold his second company. He was working on developing these, like a blood test device, a low-cost portable blood test device for diagnosing HIV and similar infections in developing countries. He said, I will be far more excited when I see our device approved for use in continents around the world and actually making a difference for people's health. That will be much more impactful to me. And then he said, this is the key quote, he said, developing products and things like this, it's about shaping the world. And that's very cool. And I thought, wow, that is such a cool quote. And so I made that part of the title because that's what we do in industry. We take the awesome knowledge that is developed in academic research, but that doesn't do anything by itself. It sits in journals and books, and it only really finds value when we go out and do something with it. And that's done mostly in the private sector, right? We create solutions that help humanity. And so that's behind the title. Shaping the World and the Vital Role of Scientists in Industry. It celebrates that. So I thought that was a powerful story. That's one of my favorite.
That's quite powerful. I think the interesting part is, something that many scientists will recognize is this delay between scientific discovery and it actually making some impact that you can see and feel. Actually, my master's was about this. So it was called Master's in Innovative Medicine. And it was just trying to bridge this gap that exists between basic research and translating to actually making a company, making some kind of drug, because they recognize that a lot of these basic science discoveries, like how does this cell contract and how does this cell signaling work, and all of that knowledge exists somewhere, and it's just piling up and piling up. But the rate at which it's just being taken and applied is very slow. So, and one of the reasons is because scientists don't really have this training. Nobody is training us to do it, right? They're just training us to research, and we do it. we discover, and then it just sits there, right? For many of these discoveries. So I guess this is where people like you come in, also to train, to offer knowledge and insight and experience. So I find what you do very valuable, and I've had other guests who do something similar. And I hope we can get across some unique point of view that you might have on this topic as well. What I would like to ask you now, going to this topic, when we say transitioning from science to industry, like industry is such a big word, like sports. It could be badminton,
Yeah,
it could be boxing, very different things. What are
right.
different careers that you see? Like, how would you categorize the main areas in which people go after academia?
Yeah, well, certainly many of us end up in purely in very technical roles, and not all of us. Many of us end up in, you might be a research scientist doing research at a company, although, research is not done nearly as much as it has been in the past, especially open-ended, greenfield, we might say, research. A lot more of us end up in something that is along the lines of product development, where somehow, even if it's focused development or focused R&D, you're aiming at trying to develop technologies for a specific solution. So that's a really big category, where you're in an R&D group or a product development group or something doing that. But there are other categories that are in industry that are still somewhat technical, but not directly working on products or working in a lab. Things like a technical writer. There are people that do that. I met a technical editor. I was at a conference in Germany several years ago and met a woman named Natalie, who mentioned she works for Angewandte Chemie. So in German, it's applied chemistry. So they hire 200. They employ 200 scientists on staff to be technical writers and editors. Or there is a job being a patent kind of a patent expert is the term, a technical expert in a patent law office, to who's going to read an invention disclosure when it comes in and understand what is the inventor saying they invented, and going out and researching the literature to see, is this new or is this not? So that's a whole category.
It's one way to be like
Things. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, that's part of his success story, right? Is working in a patent office and having time to think. That's where many of his thought experiments came from. Yeah, cool. That's right. So those are two major categories where you stay really technical or not so much.
You have this company called Turning Science, and you say you teach scientists about business. What is something that scientists don't know about business? There's some early career scientists, like PhD students maybe, or people who just finished their PhD. What is something that is in our mindset that would be useful for us to change?
So yeah, a very important thing, and this is the basis of my second book. The title of it is "It's a Game, Not a Formula." So I say success is a game, not a formula. There's a lot of talk and a lot about how to transition, about skills that are important in writing a CV or a resume and all of that. But the one thing that I see people miss a lot, and this comes from my own experience, both as a scientist transitioning into industry, but also as a hiring manager, and speaking with other managers about the struggles that PhD scientists have going into industry, we tend to come in with what I call a formula mindset. I use that term because we're scientists, right? So formula fits. It's a matter of looking for the right answer. This is what we're trained to do in school. Starts when we're kids, and we learn that they're going to give me a test, and if I have all the right answers, I get an A or a 1 or whatever the grading system is, and my teacher's happy and my parents are happy, and we learn it's about finding the right answer. But as scientists, that is our job, is to find the right answer, a formula or a theory or something that we can trust and we can publish and we can use to predict how something will function going forward. And so many of us, when we approach our careers in industry, we tend to continue looking for what's the right way to do this. Maybe, many people will approach me saying, if I want a job doing this, what additional skills or training or certifications or something do I want? And I realize they're thinking almost like a checklist, you might say, where if I get everything right, I'll get what I'm looking for, like a formula. But that's not the way it is. At some point, you have to get in the game. If you think of a game, not a puzzle where there's one right answer, but a game where there's competition. Football, soccer is a common one, right? That people know around the world. There are many ways to win that game. There's no one way. I like to say, think of the favorite three teams in whatever your favorite sport is, the best three teams. Do their coaches coach them in the exact same way? No, they all have their own strategy and their own way to win. And yet they're in the same sport, in the same field with the same rules. It's the same way in industry. There's no single way to win. You need to find your own way based on your strengths and your experiences and a way to win, instead of looking for what's the right way and continuing to train and learn more. Of course you learn more, but you learn the game not by studying and practicing kicking. To go back to football, you win the game, you learn to be good by getting in it and learning how the dynamics work. And that is the important part. Instead of looking for a right way to do it, realize there's many ways and get in there and figure out what is the best way for you. The other way, it's like a game. There are three, but the second way is winners have to take risks. And I think we're not really very used to that. We may try things that don't work in our lab, but we don't speak outwardly, we don't publish, we don't present until we are certain in our results. But in industry, managers often complain we're slow to decide because we don't want to take that risk. We want to keep studying and analyzing until we have the right answer. But industry has to move quickly, and many times decisions have to be made when we're not going to know the right way. We don't have enough data. We can't get enough data to have the right answer. So it's really this mind shift from finding the right answer, which can take a long time and it's based on certainty, and just getting in there and trying something and being okay with it not working and trying something else, playing it like a game. That is the biggest mindset shift that I think it gets missed a lot. Experienced business people understand this, but often they don't know how to communicate it to the scientists in their community because they in their company, because they don't quite understand the path we have walked and they don't really know where we're coming from. So that's the part that I try to do. That's the major element that I try to teach is industry is a game, success is a game, and how do you approach that?
When is the right time to start entering the game? Let's say I am now in my second year of Ph.D. as of the other day. Congrats to me. And I want to start with the game. How do I do it? How would you advise me? Like, would you first make
while you're still in a university setting, I think, so this is something I talk about in the book as well. While I say that there's a mindset that is needed in industry, moving quickly and taking risks and doing all of that, that can be done in a university setting. That is something that can be done. I like to describe a research mindset, which is what is predominant in academic research, where you go slowly, you study, you analyze, you're aiming for certainty, right? You are really trying to get a full, deep understanding. It's all about the creation of new knowledge. And there is a development mindset that is predominant in industry, but it's where you're working on solutions and results. Fast results are important. Certainty. It's about persuasion, not proving. It's about working on a team. The research and development mindsets are things we can develop at any time and at any point. So I encourage people to look for opportunities in their university setting to cultivate this development mindset, where maybe it's something you don't need to be absolutely certain. Building an experimental apparatus, you just need something that works. How do you move quickly? Look for opportunities to persuade others, like you have to do in an industry setting, where you can't prove it because it's not clear what the right answer is and you don't have enough data, but you have to persuade them. I think this is the best approach. That's what I suggest. So a scientist that understands these two mindsets and can pick which is needed at any one particular time is going to be more versatile and more influential. It's a great way to prepare for an industry career as early as possible.
I want to jump to a question that might be sounding a bit generic, and I've gotten some answers before, but I'm curious about hearing your opinion. There are some of these tiny little things that seem banal and not who cares how you tailor your CV, right? But I have heard that indeed it does make a difference how you make your CV, and that for some reason industry people are a different type of people. They don't like to read the same way the CV, the way academic people like to read it. Maybe can you comment on that? Is there a difference between those, and how would you advise someone at the beginning of their scientific career to start building their profile and also building their CV or resume towards a career in industry?
Yeah, I think it's a good question because there are people that still don't really understand that. And of course, terminology is different. If we talk about an academic CV, which I think is pretty much worldwide, versus a resume or industry CV, they are very different documents. In talking about this, I like to start with, well, why are they different? And then the differences make sense. When you're being hired into an academic setting, what they're really looking for is a researcher who can come in and build a good program that makes the university look good. And that's based on, well, what have you already done? And if you can show your accomplishments to date, that's a pretty good predictor that you will continue to build a great program. And so an academic CV lists everything you've done, publications and awards and presentations and just everything you've done, right? That's the idea. Industry is very different. In industry, for most roles, you're coming in to join a team to help solve problems. And usually it's a problem that they can't currently solve. And that's why they're hiring somebody. That's why they're bringing someone in. So they have very specific problems and challenges in mind. When a hiring manager is reading an industry CV or a resume, they're just trying to find right off the bat, as they start reading the first half of the page, is there something that speaks to them and says, this is somebody who can be a good contributor to the team and might be worth looking at? And the resume doesn't even have to solve or have to show you can do everything. There just has to be something to grab their attention. That's why, many of them, if they read halfway down the first page and don't see anything, they'll go on and look at someone else. Because if I think of my own experience as a hiring manager, I don't need the resume to tell me everything. I want it to show that, yeah, they've had a good career. But if a few things grab my attention, I'm going to email them, pick up the phone, get them and talk to them live. That's always has been my first step. I know not everybody does it that way. But at that point, all of a sudden the resume becomes secondary because now I'm talking to them. They said something that grabs my attention and I want to learn more than a document could ever convey. So I want to get them on the phone and talk to them. And now they can tell me stories about what they've done and I can dig into their experience and really figure out what is needed. So that is the big difference. Academic CV shows everything you've ever done because that's a record that suggests, can you do more of that? And they don't care as much if you can work in the team or solve those specific problems. It's, can you build a great research program? But industry is about, can you join this team and solve the problems that we're facing right now? That's the primary thing. So you have to grab their attention quickly.
There is some overlap there. I know that when I was applying for PhD positions, I could often see that, at least at this level of PhD, right? If you're going for a professorship, that's probably different, and it's about your vision for the future of your lab and how you're going to set it up and where do you see the lab in 5-10 years and what publications will come out of it. But for the PhD, I feel there is a bit of similarity because the professor gets the money based on their vision, and then they're hiring someone to jump in. At least that's how it works in Europe for the most part. And you're kind of already there for the set project. The project can evolve, but they already need someone with some specific set of skills who can do certain things and who will fit in well with our background. So it was often kind of easy for me to predict like what they might need. And based on if I had that in my CV, if I have done something similar or solved similar problems in my previous, let's say, internships, I could emphasize that in the CV. So that grabs their attention. Is this something that is easy to do with job advertisements in the industry as well? And is it something you would advise, and how would you advise it?
Yeah, I think that's a great practice. I mean, a job description is a great start. I usually suggest people go beyond that and try and find others who work at the company through networking, if at all possible. That is, requires some creativity, but it's very important. But absolutely, that is the right approach, is to identify what are the things they need help with. What are the things that I've done in the past that in some way are similar? And, I say similar, people change disciplines sometimes and move to a completely new technical area. And yet it is possible to find things in your history, in your experience, that are similar to the problems they are trying to solve in some way. I'm big on telling stories. I'm a big fan of telling stories because it's a great way to take that experience and help people see that you can solve their problems. It's a great way to put information in a way they go, oh, okay, I see that. We scientists have a tendency just to list facts. And this is honestly what an academic CV tends to do, right? It just lists it all right there. We tend to talk this way when we're meeting somebody at a conference, an academic conference. Well, I'm, Dave Giltner. I'm working on my Ph.D. in physics. I'm doing laser spectroscopy. I'm in the middle of a high precision test of special relativity. That's all true. And if I'm talking to someone in my area of laser spectroscopy, for example, they probably understand what I do. But if I'm talking to somebody in industry, that likely won't help them see, especially if I'm wanting to move to a new area, will not help them see how I can help them. So I need to tell stories about my experience that fit with the detective work I've done, that you described on what are the problems they're trying to solve. I tell stories that help match what I think they need. That's a great technique.
There was this, you mentioned you would go beyond just emphasizing the CV and hopefully connecting with someone who might be of help or with, tailoring your application or helping you understand the hiring process itself. But to me, this is always hard. If I imagine myself, let's say I'm applying for a job, and I've applied for jobs before. I wasn't just always strictly in academia. It's always weird to me, and I think many scientists feel this way, to add someone knowing that you're adding them for a reason, that you need them, and you're asking something from them, and you feel like you're bothering them, or they will think something of you because you are someone who's trying to progress based on their shoulders or whatever. That's the feeling, at least I have. Let's speak for myself. How would you advise would be a good way to reach out, to connect?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I understand that. I mean, that is a real concern, right? It starts to feel transactional. The way I think of it is, so I'm big on what I call informational interviews as a way of connecting with people. So not necessarily targeting them and saying, hey, do you have a job? I mean, that is very forward and I'm trying to get something from you. But if you're looking at moving into a particular, I'll say area, it could be a market, it could be a technical area, a range of companies, right, that work in some area that I'm big on a target. I think a target is really important. You have to narrow your focus and go after that. We'll start to reach out to people that are in that target area and just ask about their careers and their experience is a great place to start, because it's a genuine interest. It's not you're not trying to trick them into something else. You should be approaching it like, I'm very interested in this area and just learning about it. Could I spend 20 minutes with you on a Zoom call and just understand your career, what you do in a typical day, how you got to where you are? This is a great way to start that conversation and see what you can learn from someone. Sure, you are trying to, as you say, climb up on their shoulders. That is the way the world works. But these conversations, if you're just looking for information to help you understand, that's fine. I mean, people don't mind doing that. A lot of people are happy to give somebody information. We all know we're trying to progress in our careers, and helping someone, think of it like looking for directions. That's the way I think of it. If I'm in a new city and I don't know my way around, I can stop somebody and say, do you know how to get to the train station, or where can I find, and most people, not everyone, most people are happy to do that. If you think of it that way, I'm not asking them for money. I'm not asking them to buy me lunch. I'm just trying to find my way around, and you slowly start to learn. But these kinds of conversations, in these conversations, if you make a good impression on people, they will often offer additional information to help you out, right? If you make a good impression, it's about connecting with them around a genuine interest in their experience first. And that's a great way to get started. And then
So
it
it's
feels less.
what you're saying is it's a long-term game. I can't just connect with people the day before applying to the job.
That is absolutely it. So to come back to the game analogy, right? Networking, building a network is really what we're talking about. That's playing the long game, we might say, right? It is a long-term game. You can't say, oh, I'm going to connect with people and get a job next week. It doesn't work that way. What you do is you find people that are doing interesting things and you connect with them. And over time, that absolutely pays off. But it's about building people who know them and what they do. They know you and what you do. There's a degree of trust that is built there, and over time, that brings a lot of benefit. But if a PhD candidate thinking about a job is sitting in their office and thinking, I have to go out and connect with people, it feels transactional and manipulative and all that. Yeah, if you think of I'm trying to get something from them tomorrow or next week, it does feel that way. But if you think about it instead of I'm going to go out looking for people who are doing interesting things that I might want to do also. Oh, well, that is very different. People like to help other people who are following them down the path, right? As long as you are professional and respectful, you're clearly excited about it. I mean, I love doing that. Of course, it's what I do with my company, but it's exciting to find somebody else who's following the path you're taking, and they're curious about how you got there. And yeah, I want to do that. That's different. Now, if they say, do you have a job? Can you help me find a job? Oh, whoa, look, I've got a career. I've got other things I'm doing. That goes a bit far. But if I've been talking to somebody and I've conveyed what I do and the excitement of my career, and we connect around that, and I know of something, you know what, I will tell them, such and such company is hiring. You might want to talk to them. I actually know somebody there. You know what? I've enjoyed this conversation. I'll put in a good word for you to them. Tell them to, send them your resume or something like this. I mean, this is the way business works. This is the way industry works. It's Networking is different in industry than most people see in an academic setting, just because that's the way the business world works. In my book, some of the scientists that I have interviewed who are academic researchers but collaborators make a real point of this, that networking is just totally different in the business world. Cather Simpson is one of the scientists. She's a professor at University of Auckland, and she makes a really big point about this. I may go to a conference and see a colleague give a talk and we chat for a bit, and then that's kind of it. We may decide to collaborate and may not. But in industry, you just go out there, you talk about what you do, and you have no idea where somebody will have heard of you because people talk about things. She said, I once had somebody call me from Australia saying, so Cather, in your lab, you do this particular thing, right? She said, yeah. Well, so you could do this other thing, right? She said, well, we don't now, but we could. Well, I've got somebody that asked me if I could help them with that, and I can't do it, but I thought maybe you could. Can I send them your way? And she's like, wow, where did this come from? Now all of a sudden I've got somebody interested in working with us and maybe paying us money. This is the way it happens. But PhD candidates, we're still in an academic setting. We don't have that experience, and it can feel scary and manipulative and very uncomfortable. So if you think about it again, like I'm just looking for directions. I'm just trying to meet people doing interesting things. And I need to be able to talk about what I do in a way that makes sense, telling some stories about what I've done. I'm big on the response to, so what do you do? Having a brief and, attention grabbing response. You'd be surprised how your name spreads, how your understanding grows, and that's how you begin building your network. This is the way business operates. It's the way industry operates.
I guess one reason why these mindsets might be different in academia and industry could be because I feel that maybe in academia we are not trying to solve problems together. We are trying to solve problems. We need to solve it because we need to publish it, right? And it's a bit more guarded. I think there's this, fight over who's going to do it first, which of course there is in business as well. But I guess if the focus in industry is on solving problems, then it's in your interest to connect with as many people who can solve your problems so that you can solve those problems faster and make that money. Versus here, it's more about our group needs to do our thing and get there first. So I think that's an interesting comparison. You mentioned some people transition in a very wild way from one area of science to something completely different, and to me that feels quite. I think it can feel quite scary for many people, and they might be closed to it. So can you maybe share one story, maybe from your interviews or from previous students you have worked with, of someone who has transitioned to something completely different and had a good success story?
Well, yeah. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is my own experience. I have pivoted several times, and it is very different than you would imagine in academic research, because there's so much momentum behind a research program typically, right? The equipment you have and the understanding you have, the papers you've published, the experiments that you're working on. Many times a particular project will go years, and the idea of shifting is very different. But in industry, people do move quite a bit. If I just think of the technical discipline, the kinds of things I was doing, I started my career building lasers, developing lasers for scientific instrumentation. Then I moved into fiber amplifiers for telecommunications. Then I moved into satellite communications. And then I moved into datacom transceivers. And then I moved into remote sensing, where we're using lasers to do spectroscopy in a furnace, in an industrial furnace, very different. Even within that, we started out in coal furnaces that burn coal to boil water and make electricity. And then we moved into the steel market. Then we moved into refining. Every one of those steps required learning some new things. But it turns out in much of it, the specific technical details are not the only key thing you bring. It's your problem solving and your ability to learn quickly and your ability to work with other people and be part of a problem solving team that matter. And as a PhD scientist, you can learn the new technical details quickly. That's one of our strengths. So I have actually found that to be exciting. One of the reasons I decided to go into industry is the way I tell the story, it was about the 5th year of my PhD. So in the US, we tend not to get a master's along the way, right? We tend to get a bachelor's, and then so it can be 5 to 7 years to finish a PhD because you got your coursework and everything else in there. I decided during the last year that after 5 years of watching my advisor and the other professors, I didn't really like that career and lifestyle. They were working on the exact same things in the same office and, the same committees and working with the same people. And I thought I wanted something more dynamic. And that's absolutely what I found in industry. If I want to change, and I don't even have to change companies sometimes, right? There are companies that work in a variety of different areas. Maybe the core technology is the same, but it gives you the ability to pivot and move into something new. And I find that really exciting.
Is it possible to do both? Is it possible to be a professor who on the side is doing business? How do these two worlds collide, and how do universities look at that?
Absolutely. And that is the section, the latest of the interviews I did for this last book are industry collaborators. They're scientists who have university jobs, they're professors, they're very well established, and they collaborate with industry. And they actually describe very exciting careers doing both. Joe Shaw is one that comes to mind. I mean, there are several great stories, but so he is a professor at Montana State University in the US. And he describes that this career, he does fundamental research in optics and photonics, which is kind of my field, but he collaborates with companies. He has students go off and start their own companies in the geographical area where he lives, and then they work together. And he's like, this is so wonderful because my career excites the scientist part of me that is just curious and wants to develop new knowledge the way science does. And the kind of engineer side of my brain that wants to go out and solve problems and do practical things where I see the impact right now. And he really loves that. Cather Simpson, who I mentioned already at the University of Auckland, she describes when she realized how the impact of her work was changing after she started collaborating with industry, and just how rewarding this was. She's a professor of physics and chemistry. And she said, I started my career thinking that success would mean that some of my research is published in a book 15 years from now or something. But at some point, I was sitting in a symposium. We were getting some grant money from a surgical robotics company, and we were doing some research to explore bone surgery using high pulsed lasers like we do. And I sat there and I realized, listening to the other researchers present and talk about these things, we are solving problems that will make a difference for people in 2 to 3 years. She's like, I had no idea that the impact of my research could be that current and that impactful. It totally changed my view on how impactful my research could be. And so she's doing exactly what you asked about, doing fundamental research. She's doing really practical research that will help companies solve problems for people in a couple of years. Her group has now spun out 3 startups, making difference that way. And it's just this great career. Sometimes I joke, I've loved my career and I've been very happy with my decision to go into industry. But as I mentioned a minute ago, the reason I chose that was, to me, an academic career started to look a bit boring and not really what I wanted. Well, when I speak to these professors who collaborate with industry and just the amazing groups that they have developed, I mean, a few of them have grown into 50 to 70 people and they get their own building, right? And all these creative and exciting things. I think that is a far more exciting view of an academic career than I ever imagined. If I had that, image and that impression of what an academic career could be, I might have explored a different path. Again, no regrets, but it really has opened my eyes to a career that balances that difference. We talk so much about academia versus industry, and there is a barrier, unfortunately, between them that I don't think should be there and needs to be there. These industry collaborators, these professors that collaborate with industry, are showing that there absolutely is a good synergy between the two. This is the basis of innovation, and they are working to break down that barrier. And I just really like that. I think that's the way it should be. There should be a lot more collaboration between industry and academia, because that's what we need. New ideas. You mentioned this earlier in our conversation about ideas in academia and how they get out into industry. This facilitates this, right? It smooths that transition, and that's better for all of us.
Is this ability to connect with industry as a working scientist, let's say as a professor, is that something that heavily depends on how your university operates, or is this something that purely depends on you and your research and your abilities and your network and so on?
I think it does depend on the university. There are certainly universities that embrace it a lot more, but I don't think it, I'd rather say, I think it's any researcher can explore collaboration. I don't think they should look at it and say, well, my university is not really big on it, on industry collaboration. Maybe I can't do that. Well, I think that depends on how motivated you are. I don't think there are any that prohibit it. And I think it's an opportunity to persuade your department, start with your department head or the dean of research and help them. This is the persuasion that is so important in industry, right? Help them see the value in this, because there are many benefits of working with industry. So sure, there are absolutely universities that fully embrace this. Montana State University that I mentioned, where Joe Shaw worked, that it's a culture there, right? And that makes it easier. But there are other places, where it's a bit of a barrier, but they still make it work because they see the importance, and they're able to persuade their colleagues, wow, there's a new source for revenue for research funding. That is important. I train my PhDs and postdocs at how industry works, so they have better careers. And I'm able to, my research becomes more impactful because I start to find ways to solve problems out in the world outside, which is what we all want to do anyway. And who can argue with that as a benefit, right? So, yeah.
You had many transitions in your career. You listed
Mhm.
many of them. Was there ever a period in your career when you thought, I don't know what to do next? I'm completely lost and confused. And if you did, what helped you through that time?
That's a great question. I don't know if I would say I was lost and confused, but there were certainly periods where a hard pivot, not just on technology, but on what I wanted to do. Well, okay, so a really important turning point in my career was when I started down the path to what I do now. I was leading an entire site that was developing datacom transceivers, and I was managing this whole team of about 25 people here in Colorado, where I live. And we had been acquired by a larger company. And after about 2 years, they decided to shut our site down. If I wanted to move back to California, I could keep my job. Otherwise, I'd be out of a job. And so here I was out of a job, kind of mid-career. I'd done a lot of things that I was interested in. At the time, I had started to think more about my strengths and what I was good at and what I didn't want to do. And I started to realize how I was actually good at working with customers, something I never imagined would have been valuable. I started to understand that my ability to communicate is a bit unique for a scientist. And I ended up pivoting into a whole new angle where I was doing business development, career path was doing business development and product management. At that same time, though, in the gap between jobs, that's where I wrote my first book. I was focused on job searching and being a scientist and reminding myself of the challenge of convincing a hiring manager that even as a PhD scientist, I can help them solve practical real world problems, right? And at the time I met my publisher of my first book. He was helping people do interview books where you interview a bunch of people on a specific topic that you're interested in. It could be anything, right? And I thought, yeah, I should interview. I'd love to have a book because if you have a book, you can go out and speak and do it like a speaking circuit, right? That would be fun. But because I was looking for a job and reminded of that struggle for the PhD scientist going into industry, I thought I should interview scientists who have been successful in industry. I would love to have had that book when I was graduating and looking for a job. So I will do that, and that will be my contribution. And it's a great way to network, looking for a new job, right? An excuse to go talk to people, to interview them and get referrals. And that's when I wrote my first book. And all of that together really set me on this path that I'm on now. I started speaking on the side. I got a job, but I was doing business development and product management. I was interacting a lot with customers. I was able to travel a lot. And it's through all that I started to build the concepts for what I did in 2017. I left 7 years later. I left that job and started turning science. So yeah, I mean, there was some confusion at that point. I'd lost my job. I just a few months earlier, I'd actually gotten divorced. So it was a big period of uncertainty. And I had to decide, what do I do? But next, I took stock of what interested me, what my strengths were, and pivoted into something that has just become a really great career path.
That reminds me of a quote actually, I have his book here. Just really an accident, Mastery by Robert Greene. And I think one of the first quotes, the first chapter of this book is that we all have this, it's about this voice that we have as children, certain proclivities that we have, what we do, what we love to do. And that slowly fades away as all this peer pressure comes in and we kind of try to please everybody around us and so on. So he says, the point of the first chapter is you need to reconnect with that voice. And one of the most beautiful quotes I've seen there is that, I'm paraphrasing here, but something like, the first step towards discovering your calling is always inwards. And this sounds to me like you did exactly that in the time of uncertainty, which is you connected with, what do I want? What do I like? What am I good at? Let me ground myself in that, and that will guide me forward. Because if I ground it in somebody else's wishes and needs, then it's a shaky step to take always. So that just reminded me of that. I'm currently reading these books, so thank you for that. Very often it's conversations like this that can leave a big impact on me, and I'm sure on other people as well, where somebody just says something and it clicks and it changes your whole trajectory. Do you have a moment like that, or advice that clicked for you in your career?
Wow. Well, certainly the moment that I just described is the period, when I think of that, but I wouldn't say it really clicked. Let's see. That's a good question. Well, if I think of advice, probably the best thing for that question is, what was a piece of advice that made a big difference for me? And that's when I was told it's a technique for making hard decisions, because that, we run in places where in our lives or our careers where we're trying to make a decision and we struggle with what to do. This is a common thing, right? And one of the things I'd kind of learned through my work in industry, where many questions have no right answers, and you struggle with, I want to have the data that shows me which is the perfect answer. That's what I do as a scientist, right? And I'm really struggling with that. And what I was told, the advice I got was, look, when you get to a place like that, Dave, just pick something, just make a decision, and then work to make your choice the right decision. I thought about that for a while, and it's like, wow, I pick something and then work to make that the right decision. And they said, well, yeah, the reason that this is a great technique, one, you can't really predict the future. As a scientist, that's the whole idea. In the controlled environment of a lab, the whole idea is to find a formula that predicts how it works. But in life, career, business, there are too many unknowns and too many things that can't be predicted. You're not going to know. If you keep thinking you can pick the best thing, that's procrastination. But the second reason that this is so good is only once you make a decision can you actually figure out what really happens. There's actually a lot you can do to try and make your choice more likely to work out. And it's not to say that this technique means you will always you will always pick the best thing. We don't know. It's just that if you make a decision and start working on it moving forward, there's a lot you can do to make that a good path. And that was so transformative to realize that and to appreciate, there really is a lot you can do to make something work out. And it doesn't always work, but it's far better just to get started on it and try and make things align with what you've chosen to do than expect that there's a perfect solution somewhere and the goal is to find it.
Yeah, it reminds me of the advice my sister gave me when I was very, very young. When I was 14, I think. And I was choosing high schools, like which high school should I go to? Because you could kind of apply to multiple different ones, and they have their different procedures and kind of directs you in your life. And I was really struggling because my parents wanted one thing, I wanted a completely different thing. But they let me decide, and my sister told me at the time, just put it all on paper, weigh it the best you can in the moment, and just make a decision. And I've been using that ever since. Like if it's something that is really paralyzing me, so if it's a big decision, just positives, negatives, positive, negative. Assign points to each column according to what's important to you. Just see who gets more points in the end. That's your decision, and then you made the best you could have made in that moment.
Yeah.
At least with the knowledge you had at the time. Dave, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Where can people connect with you, reach out, maybe get mentored by you through Turning Science or something similar?
Yeah, the best place to find me is LinkedIn. That's my place. So I'm easy to find, David Giltner on LinkedIn. You can also go to my website, turningscience.com, easy to find. I learned a little bit about what I'm about. The things of value that I have. Certainly, I'm happy to connect with you and talk in person. My books, It's a Game, Not a Formula, is a great place. This is more how do you succeed in the private sector? And then shaping the world is stories of scientists who have been successful. So you have examples. Those are two great things as well. And if you're a student, and I give workshops where I expand over a 2-day workshop called How to Be More Employable in the Private Sector. I'd love to come to your university and give a workshop. There's a lot we can talk about. That is my favorite thing, is to do these workshops and spend 2 days with a group of students talking about industry and how it functions. And I tell lots and lots of stories. I told several here, but I have a lot more. That is the best way to interact. I'd love to come give a workshop at your university.
Thank you so much, David. I hope this is only the first time of many times we talk.
This has been great, Ken, and I really appreciate you having me on here, and it's been fun. I look forward to continuing to stay in touch with you as we go forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much.